So here's a weird question. You ever have a franchise you really love, yet you don't really talk about it with many people? Well, that's me and the entire Transformers series. Let me just go out and say that I'm a massive Transformers fan. There's so many things I really love about this franchise. The shows, the lore, the characters, the designs. Heck, I still occasionally collect some of the figures. I even have this giant Starscream figure in my room. The movies are definitely not great, although I will say I actually prefer the 2007 Transformer film over the original 1986 film. I hope I don't get killed for that. And then you got the shows like Beast Wars, Animated, Prime. Heck, even Cyberverse is really fun. So yeah, as you can see, I love this franchise, but for the most part, I don't really talk about it with many people. I don't know, maybe it's because it's more of a niche franchise compared to others, or I just personally enjoy the franchise on my own. I'm not really sure. But if someone were to ask me about Transformers, I will talk for hours about things. Like, I can talk for hours on why Animated is such a well-written show, or why I don't really like the Machinima series, or why Revenge of the Fallen on the Wii is a game. Speaking of Transformers games, there's been a ton of them. I'm sure most people, when Transformers and video games are mentioned in the same conversation, you'd probably think of the old Famicom game Convoy no Nazo, the game a lot of other big content creators have mentioned for being, well, terrible. But if we're talking good Transformers games, there is War for Cybertron, Dark of the Moon, and Fall of Cybertron. 3 really great third-person shooter games that I spent so much time playing the online multiplayer back when the servers were still up. Though, the less we talk about Rise of the Darkspark, the better. But today, I want to talk about a specific Transformer game that I don't see many people talk about, and one that, in my opinion, is the best Transformer game ever made. That's right, the game I'm talking about today is Transformers Generation 2 by Tiger Electronics. Nah, I'm just kidding. We're talking about Transformers on the PlayStation 2. So this game was based off Transformers Armada, which was the first part of the Unicron trilogy. It was basically a trilogy of 3 Transformers anime series. I watched this show quite a bit back then, and while I wouldn't say it's the best show to start with if you want to get into Transformers, I'd personally say Animated is the best show to start with. And I mean, I still love this show, but this dub hasn't aged very well. The characters constantly getting the names wrong, the voice acting getting pretty awkward sometimes, and wow, the animation at the beginning of the series? Yikes. But honestly, it's still a fun series, though I'd recommend watching the Japanese version if you can. It's a lot better. Okay, before we really get into this game, let's talk about this title first. It's just called Transformers. No subtitle or anything like that, which would be pretty confusing considering there are 2 other games just called Transformers on the PlayStation 2. The Japanese Transformer game and Transformers the game based off the first movie. Yeah, pretty confusing. Now it is true it kinda had a subtitle called Prelude to Energon, but it's still for the most part just called Transformers. Now this game was released in 2004 and was published by Atari and developed by Melbourne House. Now I think most of you know who Atari is, but Melbourne House developed a few other licensed games you may have played, including the infamous Back to the Future on NES. Yeah, we don't need to go there. Interesting thing though, this was actually one of the last games developed by Melbourne House before they were acquired by Chrome Studios, who ironically would do, yeah, that. I don't remember exactly when I got it, but I think I got it around that time I was really focused on getting a bunch of PS2 games, and when I played it back then, I loved it. There was a lot I really liked about this game. So anyways, let me tell you exactly why this game is pretty underrated, and maybe see if I can recommend this game to a non-Transformer fan. So our story is pretty basic. So the Autobots and Decepticons are at war with each other, and each of them are trying to collect these mini Transformers called Minicons. Think of them like Pokemon, however they allow the user to power up. So, as the leader of the Autobots, Optimus Prime, along with Hotshot and Red Alert, they need to collect the Minicons and stop the Decepticons and their leader Megatron from getting them all. Yeah, it's a pretty basic story, and even though this game is based off the Armada series, it's not canon at all. None of the human characters are here. The story, while it's similar, goes in a much different direction, and a lot of the Transformers that were featured in the series are not here. In fact, only the three main Autobots I mentioned here are from the show, and only 4 Decepticons are featured in this game, that being Megatron, Starscream, Cyclonus, and Tidal Wave. Oh, and Unicron's here, who, if you don't know, devours entire planets, so think of him kinda like Galactus from Marvel. But he literally shows up out of nowhere near the end of the game. Like, no build up to him at all. After you beat Megatron, he just shows up. Otherwise, the story is fine. There barely even is one to begin with, and hey, at least you don't need to watch the show to play this game, so that's a plus. I will say, the CG cutscenes look really good. And while a lot of the voice actors didn't come back for this game, we at least got Gary Chalk and David Kaye reprising the roles as Optimus and Megatron respectively.
Trace that energy wave to its origin. Autobots, we must stop Megatron. Roll out!
And sure, while I do love Peter Cullen and Frank Welker's Optimus and Megatron as well, these two are still great though. And in terms of the other voice actors we have, it's pretty mixed to say the least. Like, some of it is pretty decent. Like, I actually kind of like Red Alert's voice in this game compared to the one that's actually in Armada. But some of the other voice acting is just not very good.
Prepare for extermination.
Destiny. You cannot destroy my destiny.
Overall, the voice acting isn't downright terrible, but definitely not great. Now for the environments, wow, this game still looks really good for a PS2 game. Like, man, they really nailed these environments down. I think the best looking environments are definitely the Amazon and the Alaska levels. These look really nice especially. I also think the models look pretty good as well. They do look a bit dull sometimes, but for the most part, I think the models look really nice. I wouldn't say it's one of the best looking games during this generation or anything like that, but for a PS2 game in 2004, this is really good. I also really like this soundtrack. Most of it is ambience, which I really think fits the levels pretty well. It makes you feel like you're going through these mysterious lands. Now, there are some more hard rocking music for the enemy encounters and boss fights, and these are also really good stuff. Like, man, they did not need to go this hard on Starscream's theme. So yeah, overall, presentation is pretty good, and I think aside from some of the voice acting, most of it still holds up pretty well. So this game is basically a third-person shooter, where you have the choice of 3 Autobots to play as, those being Optimus, Hotshot, and Red Alert. They all play exactly the same, so it's just a matter of preference on who you like more. For this playthrough, I just played as Optimus since, well, I just like Optimus the most. I know, I'm boring. Anyways, you explore these big regions to stop whatever the Decepticons are doing, as well as collect the minicons, which I'll talk about in a bit. They really nail the controls in this game. Because, you know, you're controlling these massive robots. So the weight you feel when you control them feels really natural. Even jumping feels this way. Now for abilities, you can obviously transform whenever you want, and while it does feel really good, there aren't going to be that many times where you have to transform. I only transformed whenever there was a gap I needed to drive across or I needed to run away from some enemies. Since the thing is, you don't really have a lot of space to transform and drive around in these levels. It's still great they have this feature, but it's definitely something I'm a little disappointed wasn't utilized much better, since, you know, the game is called Transformers.
Oh, and there's also this really cool first-person mode you can enter. You move a lot slower in this mode, but you can aim a little bit more precise.
Now let's talk about the minicons. So you have 4 different minicon slots up top. These correspond with the 4 shoulder buttons. There are some minicons that give you a new blaster, which you really want to get because the default blaster kind of blows even against the first couple enemies. Some that give you just another weapon to utilize, such as grenades and such. Another one that gives you buffs, such as a defense. And then there are some like Slipstream, which gives you wings to glide around, which is essential for a few stages. I love this mechanic. Sure, you gotta find the minicons before you could use them, and unless you activate a cheat code, there is a limit to which minicons you could use. But this system allows for a lot of versatility and gives you a ton of options to go with. For the most part, it's up to you, and that's what I really like about it. Now sure, there are some minicons that are just upgraded versions of other minicons, but still, you have so many options to choose from, and while there are some minicons that are mandatory to use like Slipstream as I mentioned before, you still got a ton of ways you could go through these levels. There is also this bullet time you could use with your partner minicon, but I never really used this since this drained health. But if you wanted to really get a move on and want to try and get through these enemies as fast as possible, it is another option. And you better come prepared against these enemies because even on normal, this game is pretty challenging. The main enemies are these Decepticlones, and they can give you a lot of trouble even in the first stage. But it's more of a fair challenge and doesn't really feel like it's unfair garbage. I feel this game is designed well enough where you have enough room to actually plan out on how to deal with the threat at hand. And sure, I died quite a bit to this game, but again, it's a good challenge. There is no live system, and you have checkpoint warp gates that can not only save your progress, but you can warp back to HQ and switch out either another minicon loadout or switch out another character, which is great to have. Now the levels themselves are pretty massive, and I can definitely see how you could get lost in some of these stages, but honestly I think that's only really a problem with like the very first stage. It's pretty massive and you gotta try and make it up this mountain, but thankfully this game does show you where you need to go, and in case you don't want to hear them, you could just not press the prompt at the bottom, which I really like. It caters to both crowds, where if someone just wants to get a move on, and someone who just needs a little bit of help. I really like that. These levels are pretty fun though, and I think my favorites have to be the Arctic because I just really like the atmosphere a lot in this stage. And this Decepticon ship level is so cool. Basically, you enter and go through it normally, and then you have to go through the entire thing again while it's upside down. So you gotta platform up through this ship while pretty eerie music is playing. It's so chilling, but I love it. The bosses I also think turned out pretty well. Again, these fights can be tricky, but they are so much fun to fight. Both Starscream fights are fast and frantic. Cyclonus literally throws you Mario 64 style. The fight against Tidal Wave is so cool. He's this giant Decepticon and you're this tiny Autobot and you gotta fight him on this island. And it's so cool to try and strategize during this fight with all this room you have. Megatron's fight is difficult, but he's another great one. And I love these moves he throws on you. They are so ridiculous. Like, geez, Megatron, calm down. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the ragdoll physics are so funny. Like, whenever you get blasted by something or thrown, it's the funniest thing. Like, whenever Megatron throws you in his fight, it just cracks me up every time. Now, the final boss with Unicron is pretty decent, though it's probably the easiest fight in this game. Like, he was not hard at all. Now, depending on which difficulty you choose, you will need a certain number of minicons before you can fight Unicron, with hard being the most since you'll need all 40 of them. I don't really mind this honestly, since by the time you get to Unicron and if you've been exploring the levels, you should have enough to fight him. Oh, and besides minicons, you could also collect datacons, which unlock a ton of bonus features, and these extras are so cool. You get the actual instructions for certain figures of the Armada toy line, even if some of the toys haven't really aged that well. Dang, what happened to Hotshot's face? You got concept art, of course, stuff about the actual cartoon series and its sequel series Energon, a full comic, and even very rare PSAs from the original G1 Transformers series, which is really cool to have here. These are such cool extras to have, and are well worth the hunt for the datacons. This game is so good, and I'm not saying this game is perfect. Oh no, it has its problems. I definitely think there should have been more room to transform. I can definitely see the difficulty being kind of a turnoff to some players, and the game itself isn't very long. But, compared to other licensed games in general, I think this game absolutely nails what it's trying to do. Now obviously I would totally recommend a Transformer fan play this. Even if you have to resort to emulation, play this game. it's so good. But the big question is, could I recommend this game to a non-Transformer fan / casual video gamer? And my answer to this question would be, yeah, I would. The thing is, you don't need to know anything about Armada or Transformers in general to really enjoy this. Since 1, it's not canon to the cartoon series, and 2, you don't need any sort of prior knowledge of the franchise beforehand, so I would absolutely recommend anyone play this. And it's a great starting place too if you ever want to give the series a shot. It's not just a good Transformer game, it's not even just a good licensed game, it's just a great game in general. Now, you are going to have to hunt down a copy of this since it was never re-released and it's only on the PlayStation 2. Thankfully though, copies only go for around $10 to $20, so you shouldn't have a hard time finding a copy of it online. Or you could just emulate it, that's another option. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. This was a pretty fun one to make. If any of you have played this game or have experiences with this franchise, let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button for more content. But have a wonderful day everyone, and take care. Bye!